Graham Norton has never been the professional, a host who could deal with chaos, laughter, awkwardness, and even silence without breaking a sweat, turning nearly every celebrity encounter into fun TV. But as he once confessed with a wry smile, even he has his limits. For years, everyone would ask him the worst guest he'd ever had, and he always sidestepped the question. Don't want to upset anyone naturally, he said, never intending to burn bridges in a field based on reputation and charm. But eventually Norton, 62 now with decades under his belt of television work, at last came clean. He revealed that there were some guests who excelled not for their wit, charm, or interesting tales, but rather for the opposite. 6 names actually that have joined his personal mental roll call of the most challenging. Some were disorganized, some uninterested, and some downright unpleasant. And perhaps most shockingly of all, he singled out Harvey Weinstein as the worst individual guest of his decades-long run. Once he began speaking candidly, the stories flowed, each one revealing the strange, cringeworthy, or excruciating moments when the famously smooth-running Graham Norton show nearly derailed. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Star Vault TV, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. When most people think of the Graham Norton show, they picture a red couch filled with celebrities laughing together, cracking jokes, and sharing anecdotes with Norton himself leaning in, twinkle-eyed, egging them on while the audience roars. But not all guests fall into that equation. In 2013, Mark Wahlberg was a guest who gained notoriety not for what he had to say, but because of the absolute destruction he created on set. Before the cameras even began to roll, the mayhem started. Wahlberg, according to Norton's own later description, arrived clearly drunk, already relying heavily on the boost of booze. While some of the guests recoil into themselves when intoxicated, Wahlberg did not. He bulldozed through discussions, constantly interrupting and transforming what could have been good-natured joking into unsteady unawkwardness. Rather than conversing with his co-guests, with Sarah Silverman being one of them that night, Wahlberg took over, uttering coarse comments and unstable jokes that disrupted the flow of the show. Among the most memorable was the time Wahlberg, laughing and slurring, bodily crawled onto Graham Norton's lap. For a host accustomed to testing limits with wit, the moment was not saucy, it was transgressive. Norton's body told it all. He visibly squirmed, his smile strained, his shoulders tense, but went on as always, keeping the show moving. The crowd tittered nervously, not knowing whether they were part of a joke or seeing a train wreck in progress. Wahlberg later dismissed the entire affair, confessing in an interview that he had a few drinks beforehand and enjoyed himself too much. But while he thought it was all in good fun, many viewers and even some of his guest panelists disagreed. Sarah Silverman tried her best to roll with it, smiling through the insanity, but even she seemed nervous. For Norton, Wahlberg's inebriated behavior wasn't awkwardness, just plain draining, pushing his skills at shepherding live TV to the limit. That episode is one of the most analyzed and rerun in the history of the show, a reminder of how slight the line between humorous and cringe-inducing. And then there was Mickey Rourke, the altogether different headache. Too much, Wahlberg was hardly present Rourke. He came dressed in his quirky manner, shades on inside and little dog Loki in tow, but exuded boredom from the second he sat down. Unlike other celebrities who would at least pretend excitement for the cameras, Rourke responded with one-word answers, brushed off playfulness with shrugged shoulders, and spoke in a voice that didn't make it possible to tell if he was kidding or being horribly serious. Norton attempted everything, asking about his career path, talking about his favorite dog, even engaging in teasing pokes, but Rourke stayed shut down, arms crossed, eyes wandering off the set. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, but worse, perhaps, a grinding, slow interview in which Norton was forced to bear the burden of both sides of the exchange. Even when Rourke uttered something as genuine as declaring Loki the love of my life, it was delivered in the same affectless tone as everything else, depriving the moment of emotional weight. For Norton, accustomed to salvaging struggling interviews, This one was exceptional in that it offered him nothing to work with. The excitement was so anemic it brought down the whole segment, leaving both viewers and other guests quietly wincing in their seats. Kevin Costner's appearance was also awkward, but less so. Respected for his stoic nature, Costner did not act up or cut off like Rourke. He was just not constructed for the show format. Norton lives for rapid-fire jokes, witty repartee, and humorous anecdotes, but Costner answered questions with meandering, rambling, serious responses that killed the beat stone dead. When Norton attempted to elicit humor from his experience filming real wolves in Dances with Wolves, Costner deflected it into a meandering comparison of vacuum cleaner salesmen and lost the crowd altogether. He wasn't unpleasant. He was serious, thoughtful, and utterly humorless. His presence converted the boisterous group chat into a plotting press conference. Norton has subsequently conceded that some individuals simply do not understand the format, and Costner was one of them. Stiffly seated on the couch, polite but uninvolved in the repartee, he became an anchor that dragged down the show's natural rhythm. For Norton, it was not hostility, but it remained awkwardly laborious. But no guest has ever been more notoriously troublesome than Robert De Niro. This is a legendary actor known for his intense privacy, plus how difficult it has been to interview him. His visit to Norton's couch did little to temper that reputation. As soon as he sat down, the energy in the room changed. As others around him laughed and joked to fill the air, De Niro shrugged off questions with brief one-sentence answers, hesitant nods, or sometimes nothing at all. Norton, who has a knack for drawing shy guests out of their skins, was himself running into a brick wall. He referenced De Niro's classic movies, queried him about backstage stories, even joking about De Niro's own taciturnity, but nothing penetrated. Somewhere along the line, after yet another unresponsive flat, Norton let out a deep breath and quipped with sarcastic humor, "This is hard work, Robert," which brought a sympathetic laugh from the audience. But behind the joke was the reality. It was indeed hard work. De Niro wasn't aggressive or insulting. He was just plainly not interested in playing ball. On a program that relied on spontaneity and humor, his stern-faced presence was like a lead balloon. And then, of course, came Harvey Weinstein. Far from his eventual fall, before the world was aware of the full range of his crimes and abuses, Weinstein was already notoriously an obnoxious figure in the background of Hollywood. When he was on Graham Norton's program, those tendencies seeped through. In contrast to guests like comedians or actors who are there to be entertained and tell their tales, Weinstein wasn't an entertainer. He was a producer and a man with a reputation for dominating any conversation. Throughout the evening, he interrupted other guests, shuttled over Norton in mid-question, and redirected every topic back to his own success. He boasted of movies he'd produced, awards he'd received, and stars he'd allegedly discovered, speaking always in tones of smug self-praise. His egomania drew the breath out of the air. Norton, visibly tense, attempted desperately to downplay, but Weinstein's overwhelming presence was unreproducible. The crowd replied with strained guffaws at best, and other partygoers recoiled as Weinstein dominated. It made sense, Norton conceded in retrospect. Years afterward, when Weinstein's long pattern of sexual harassment had been made public, Norton looked back on that appearance and commented, "I didn't know at the time, but in hindsight, you do think, oh, that fits." Seeing the footage now is disturbing. His condescension, his interrupting, his putting down of others, it all looks different as the actions of a man accustomed to dominating every room he entered. For Norton, it was one of the most exhausting interviews of his life, not wild or crazy, but stealthily poisonous, and he has since confessed that Weinstein was the worst interviewee he ever had. But worse, in a sense, was Daryl Hannah. In contrast to Weinstein, Wahlberg, or Rourke, Hannah wasn't obnoxious, out of control, or intoxicated. She just flat out refused to participate. It was as if she wasn't present the moment she sat on the red couch. Norton, who could get even the most introverted of visitors to crack up, got nothing. One-word answers, sometimes two-word answers. Long, agonizing silences after each question. No spark, no sense of humor, no playfulness to be engaged. Norton eventually referred to the experience as excruciating, confessing that it was the one time that he had no place to be. While Robert De Niro's silence at least allowed others to fill the void, Hannah's caused the conversation to close down entirely. Even the audience shifted uncomfortably as Norton attempted, repeatedly, to get something, anything, to happen, and was met instead with empty stares and grunted responses. For a host who had made a living out of improvisation for so many years, this was the one occasion his talents let him down, not because he wasn't talented, but because his guest presented him with nothing to play off. Norton has never been coy since then when questioned as to who his worst guest was. It was not a tipsy actor, an ego-tripping producer, or an irascible legend. It was Daryl Hannah, who just sat there looking as though she had been half-dragged onto the stage. These 6 visitors, Wahlberg, Rourke, Costner, De Niro, Weinstein, and Hannah, are a diverse range of challenges from incivility to taciturnity, arrogance to withdrawal. For Norton, who has sat thousands of stars and succeeded in making all but a handful amusing, they are notable for the reason that they pushed him to the limits of his skill at keeping the program lively. There was each one of the following: Wahlberg's inebriated incursion, Rourke's vacant disinterest, Costner's unfunny seriousness, De Niro's mythic taciturnity, Weinstein's poisonous self-importance, and Hannah's utter lack of application. And whereas most of them have dissolved into the bottomless compendium of the Graham Norton Show, Norton never has. They are the exception when even the most suave host of late-night television couldn't quite conjure the magic. So, when finally at 62 years of age, Graham Norton confessed the truth, it wasn't in bitterness or resentment. It was in honesty, a frank admission that not every guest is a dream, and that even the greatest hosts have some nights they'd rather forget. For viewers, the tales are compelling, a glimpse behind the scenes of a show that normally looks so seamless. And for Norton, they're a reminder of how mercurial live TV can be. There are guests who provide you with jewels. There are guests who provide you with anarchy. And there are guests, as he concedes now with an exasperated grin, who provide you with nothing.